Welcome back to the series Kaaba Under Siege, a symbol of the unity of the Muslim Ummah and the heart of the Islamic world. In the first part of our story, we saw the attack on Kaaba during the reign of Abraha, the Abyssinian general. But today, we turn to a darker chapter in its history, the second fitna in Islam, a time of political turmoil and bloody conflict that threatened the very sanctity of the Kaaba. The Quraysh, the custodians of the Kaaba in pre-Islamic Arabia, held a unique and central position in the Arabian Peninsula. Their control over the Kaaba, the sacred house of Allah, made them both powerful and revered. But with the rise of Islam, this relationship underwent a profound transformation. With the Quraysh's conversion to Islam, their role as custodians of the Kaaba took on a new dimension. The tribe's leadership, including many of the Prophet's former adversaries, embraced Islam and became key figures in its expansion. The Quraysh's historical role as protectors of the Kaaba was now aligned with the teachings of Islam. The Quraysh were now not only just the masters of Mecca. Islam had transformed them into the masters of not only all of Arabia, but also the masters of the mighty Roman and Persian empires. Under the leadership of the rightly guided caliphs, and later the Umayyad, Abbasid and Fatimid dynasties, the Quraysh's influence continued. Many descendants of the tribe held significant positions in Islamic governance of the Muslim world, while the Kaaba remained the center of the Islamic world, a unifying symbol for Muslims everywhere. However, different factions of the Quraysh started fighting each other in the second fitna, or the Second Civil War of Islam. This would shape the very future of the Islamic Empire, and it all began with the death of Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan in 680 CE. Muawiyah, the founder of the Umayyad Caliphate, ruled as a strong and strategic leader. He moved the capital from Medina to Damascus, Syria. As the Christian Byzantine Empire was a major rival, Damascus allowed better oversight and defense against Byzantine incursions and facilitated offensive campaigns. His reign, though marked by political maneuvering and military victories, was also filled with tensions and divisions within the Muslim community. By the time of his death, Muawiyah had consolidated power across much of the empire. However, his passing would ignite a fierce battle for succession. Upon his death, Muawiyah's son Yazid inherited the caliphate. The succession was controversial from the start. Muawiyah had named Yazid as his successor years earlier, breaking with the traditional practice of choosing a caliph through consultation or consensus. He turned the caliphate into a dynasty. Many saw Yazid as an unfit leader, not only due to his youth and perceived lack of piety, but also because of the way the succession was imposed. Yazid's ascension to the caliphate led to a deep rift in the Muslim world. On one side were the supporters of the Umayyads, who rallied around Yazid's rule. On the other were those who opposed him, believing his rule was unjust. Among them were two key figures, Hussein ibn Ali in Medina and Abdullah ibn Zubayr in Mecca. Hussein's refusal to pledge allegiance to Yazid would set off a chain of events that culminated in the tragedy of Karbala in 680 CE. Hussein's refusal was not just a personal stance, it was a symbol of resistance against what he saw as the corrupt and illegitimate rule of Yazid. He rejected Yazid's caliphate, and in a dramatic move, Hussein and his followers left Medina and headed toward Kufa, a city that had offered him support. However, Hussein's journey was tragically cut short. The Umayyad army, led by Yazid's generals, intercepted him at Karbala, where Hussein and his companions were surrounded. Despite being vastly outnumbered, Hussein refused to surrender. On the 10th of Muharram, the battle culminated in the martyrdom of Hussein and many of his companions. This event, known as the Battle of Karbala, became a defining moment in Islamic history. The martyrdom of Hussein deeply shocked the Muslim world. It was not just a military defeat, it was a profound spiritual loss that galvanized opposition to the Umayyad rule. The event led to widespread mourning and inspired countless revolts and uprisings against the Umayyads in the years that followed. Meanwhile, in Mecca, Abdullah ibn Zubayr continued to defy Yazid's rule, establishing his own caliphate. He was able to secure support from the people of Medina, Kufa, and the Hijaz region who were opposed to the Umayyads in Syria. Abdullah ibn Zubayr was born in 622 CE. He was the first Muslim child born in Medina after the migration, Hijrah, of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his companions. His birth was considered a joyous occasion and a symbol of hope for the Muslim community. His father, Zubayr ibn al-Awwam, was one of the closest companions of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. He was known as one of the Ashara Mubashara, the 10 companions promised paradise. Zubayr ibn al-Awwam was a cousin of the Prophet Muhammad. Zubayr was the son of Safiya bint Abdul Muttalib, who was the Prophet's paternal aunt. He was a skilled warrior and played a key role in many of the Prophet's military campaigns, including the battles of Badr and Uhud. Abdullah's mother was Asma bint Abu Bakr, who was the daughter of Abu Bakr al-Siddiq, the first caliph of Islam and one of the closest companions of the Prophet. Asma bint Abu Bakr was also the sister of Aisha, the Prophet's beloved wife. This made Abdullah ibn Zubayr the nephew of Aisha and by extension also the Prophet's nephew through marriage. After the tragic events of Karbala in 680 CE, the rift between the Umayyads and their opponents grew even wider. Abdullah ibn Zubayr, who had been a key figure in opposing Yazid, seized the opportunity and declared himself caliph in Mecca, the holiest city in Islam. Abdullah ibn Zubayr also rejected Yazid's rule and was supported by various factions who felt that the Umayyads had corrupted the caliphate and deviated from the principles set by Prophet Muhammad's family. This rebellion was not just political, it also had deep religious implications, particularly among those who believed the leadership should remain with the family of the Prophet. Ibn Zubayr's rise to power was seen as an act of resistance against the Umayyads' increasingly authoritarian rule, and he was soon declared the legitimate caliph by a significant portion of the Muslim community. The Umayyads, under pressure, got cornered in Damascus, Syria, which was their capital. Yazid, desperate to maintain control over the Muslim world, saw Abdullah ibn Zubayr's rebellion as a direct threat to his authority. He was determined to crush the rebellion and reassert Umayyad's dominance. After consolidating his power in Syria and other parts of the empire, Yazid ordered a military campaign to crush the rebellion and reassert Umayyad authority. The target was clear: Mecca, the heart of the rebellion and the stronghold of Abdullah ibn Zubayr. In 683 CE, Yazid's forces set out of Damascus and marched onto Mecca and laid siege to the city in an effort to break the rebellion once and for all. Yazid's forces, led by his general al-Husayn ibn Numayr as-Sakuni, were formidable. The Umayyad army was large, well-equipped and experienced. As they approached the city, they knew very well they were facing a determined and desperate foe in Abdullah ibn Zubayr and his supporters. Inside Mecca, Abdullah ibn Zubayr and his supporters, including many of the early companions of the Prophet and their descendants, fortified the city. They knew the siege would be a test of endurance, but their faith and conviction in their cause gave them the courage to resist. Ibn Zubayr himself took charge of the defense, fully aware of the dire situation they were in. The Umayyad forces surrounded Mecca, cutting off supplies and isolating the city. They brought with them siege engines, catapults and other artillery to break the city's defenses. But the defenders, despite being outnumbered, held strong, with Abdullah ibn Zubayr leading from the front. For several weeks, the two sides were locked in a brutal standoff. The Umayyads relentlessly bombarded the city with catapults and other siege weapons, causing severe damage. But it was not just the physical toll that weighed on the defenders, it was the psychological pressure of knowing that their survival hinged on holding the sacred city, the very heart of Islam. Despite the heavy bombardment, Abdullah ibn Zubayr's resolve did not waver. The situation in Mecca grew more desperate. The Umayyads were relentless, and Ibn Zubayr's forces were running low on food and supplies. At the same time, the Umayyad forces continued to grow in strength as reinforcements arrived, and their siege grew tighter by the day. With the siege dragging on, the people inside Mecca, including some of Ibn Zubayr's allies, began to question how much longer they could hold out. The Kaaba, once a symbol of unity and faith, had been battered by the relentless attacks. Yet, Abdullah ibn Zubayr remained resolute, refusing to surrender. To break the resolve of Abdullah and his supporters, the Umayyad forces used brutal tactics. They set up siege engines and catapults, launching stones and fire at the city. In a shocking act of sacrilege, the Kaaba itself came under attack. The Umayyads, in their determination to quell the rebellion, aimed their weapons at the sacred structure. The siege inflicted severe damage on the Kaaba. The stones fired by the Umayyads caused parts of the Kaaba's walls to collapse, and a fire broke out, burning sections of the holy sanctuary. For the Muslims in Mecca, this was an unimaginable horror. The Kaaba, which represented the very heart of Islam, was desecrated in the midst of a political and military struggle. The Kaaba, the holiest site in Islam, became a symbol of this bitter struggle. The siege of Mecca in 683 CE was not just a political struggle, it was a conflict that would leave its mark on the holiest city in Islam and change the course of history. Later, in 683 CE, just as the siege was reaching its peak, a dramatic turn of events occurred. Yazid ibn Muawiyah died. His death threw the Umayyad dynasty into turmoil. His son Muawiyah II was named caliph, but he was weak and lacked the support necessary to hold the empire together. In this moment of instability, Abdullah ibn Zubayr's position was strengthened, as he was seen by many as the rightful caliph. Following Yazid's death, Umayyad forces were unable to continue the siege. The siege of Mecca was lifted, at least temporarily, as the Umayyad Empire was fractured. This period of instability allowed Abdullah ibn Zubayr to consolidate his power further in Mecca and even gain control over the Hijaz region and other parts of Arabia. Despite Abdullah ibn Zubayr's victory in this battle, the damage inflicted upon the Kaaba during the siege was severe. Parts of the Kaaba's walls had been destroyed and sections of the roof were burned. The holy sanctuary was left in a state of disrepair, symbolizing the deep scars left by the conflict. After the siege was lifted, one of Abdullah ibn Zubayr's first actions was to rebuild the Kaaba. He undertook a massive reconstruction project, repairing the damaged sections and even expanding the structure. He ensured that the Kaaba's sacred interior was restored to its former glory. Abdullah ibn Zubayr decided to rebuild the Kaaba based on the original design envisioned by Prophet Ibrahim, as well as the teachings of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. According to tradition, the Prophet had expressed a wish to rebuild the Kaaba in its earlier form, but he refrained out of concern for the faith of the newly converted Quraysh. Abdullah ibn Zubayr expanded the dimensions of the Kaaba, extending its height to nearly 13 meters. He also included the Hatim area, a semicircular space adjacent to the Kaaba, as part of the structure, believing it to be part of the original foundation laid by Prophet Ibrahim. It was said that he also added a new door to the Kaaba, raising its entrance higher so that only the most deserving could enter. The repairs symbolized not only the physical restoration of Islam's holiest site, but also the resilience of Abdullah ibn Zubayr and his supporters. The reconstruction was carried out with the finest materials available, using stone and wood brought from the surrounding regions. Abdullah ibn Zubayr personally supervised the work, ensuring that the sanctity of the Kaaba was preserved throughout the process. After months of dedicated work, the Kaaba stood restored, more magnificent than ever. Abdullah ibn Zubayr's reconstruction fulfilled a long-held aspiration of the Muslim community, returning the Kaaba to its original form as envisioned by Prophet Ibrahim, peace be upon him. It also marked Abdullah ibn Zubayr's authority as the legitimate caliph, although his rule would not last long. After Imam Hussein's martyrdom, no one in the Islamic world wanted to see the caliphate in the hands of the house of Abu Sufyan. After Muawiyah II, Marwan ibn al-Hakam, an Umayyad relative, eventually became caliph in 684 AD, and he sought to restore Umayyad authority. In 692 CE, his son Abdul Malik ibn Marwan ascended to the caliphate. He was determined to crush Abdullah ibn Zubayr's rebellion once and for all. Abdul Malik ibn Marwan wasted no time in asserting his authority. He understood that the only way to end the challenge posed by Abdullah ibn Zubayr was through military might. The conflict between them would not be a quick skirmish, it would be a battle for the very soul of the caliphate. Abdul Malik's first major step was to consolidate support within the Umayyad territories and secure loyalty from regional governors and generals. He strengthened his military presence in Syria and Iraq, calling upon the Umayyad forces to fight under his banner. His leadership was decisive, and his ability to unite the disparate factions within the empire was key to his success. With his forces now unified, Abdul Malik began planning the military campaign to crush Abdullah ibn Zubayr. His first major action was to send Hajjaj ibn Yusuf, one of the most ruthless and efficient generals in the Umayyad army, to lead the assault on Ibn Zubayr. Hajjaj was a man known for his strict discipline and brutal tactics, and he would prove to be a formidable adversary. In 692 CE, Hajjaj launched a final siege of Mecca, determined to break Abdullah ibn Zubayr's hold over the city once and for all. Mecca was surrounded, and the fighting intensified. Despite the previous failures of the Umayyad forces, Hajjaj's leadership and discipline made a significant difference. The Umayyad army was better equipped and more organized this time, and they were relentless in their pursuit of victory. The siege of Mecca was not just a military operation, it was a battle for religious and political legitimacy. Abdullah ibn Zubayr, who had rebuilt the Kaaba after the destruction during the early years of the rebellion, resisted fiercely. His forces were committed to defending their city and their claim to the caliphate, but the Umayyad siege was too overwhelming. The Umayyad forces launched catapults at Mecca, targeting the Kaaba once again. The damage inflicted was devastating, and the holiest site in Islam became a symbol of the harshness of the siege. The city of Mecca was in flames, and Abdullah ibn Zubayr's defenders were worn out. Despite their best efforts, the city fell under the pressure of the Umayyad military might. In 692 CE, after months of brutal fighting, the Umayyad forces finally captured Abdullah ibn Zubayr, who was executed. His body was crucified in a public place in Mecca. This act was intended to serve as a warning to others who might challenge Umayyad rule. Hajjaj ibn Yusuf reportedly mocked Abdullah ibn Zubayr's body, displaying it to humiliate him and diminish his legacy. According to some accounts, his body was left hanging for several days, a stark violation of Islamic norms regarding the immediate burial of the dead. Abdullah's mother, the elderly and pious Asma bint Abi Bakr, confronted Hajjaj about his treatment of her son. Despite her advanced age, she displayed immense courage and faith, refusing to be intimidated by Hajjaj's cruelty. Her resilience and defiance are remembered as acts of great dignity. Eventually, Abdullah ibn Zubayr's body was taken down and buried. The exact circumstances of his burial are not well documented, but it is clear that his supporters considered him a martyr for his resistance against the Umayyad regime. The treatment of Abdullah ibn Zubayr's body by the Umayyads was widely condemned, even among those who supported the dynasty. It highlighted the brutality of Hajjaj ibn Yusuf, whose harsh methods were both feared and criticized in the Islamic world. Despite the humiliation intended by the display, Abdullah ibn Zubayr is remembered as a symbol of defiance and steadfastness in the face of tyranny. His life and death became a rallying point for those who opposed the Umayyad dynasty. His death marked the end of the rebellion and an end to the second fitna. It also marked the consolidation of Umayyad power. With Abdullah ibn Zubayr's death, Abdul Malik ibn Marwan emerged as the undisputed ruler of the Islamic Empire. His efforts to crush the rebellion were successful, but the cost was high. The Kaaba had been desecrated, and the religious and political unity of the Muslim world had been fractured. When the Umayyads regained control of Mecca, they found the Kaaba in its newly rebuilt form. However, Caliph Abd al-Malik ordered that it be reconstructed again, reverting to the structure that existed during the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Abdul Malik ibn Marwan made changes to the Kaaba, built by Ibn Zubayr. The Hijr Ismail was excluded from the Kaaba's structure and left as a separate area outside the building. The second door added by Ibn al-Zubayr was removed, leaving only one door. Additionally, the Kaaba's walls and roof were reinforced to make the structure more durable. His motivations were both political and theological, as he wanted to assert Umayyad legitimacy over the Islamic holy site. The Kaaba, as rebuilt by Abd al-Malik, closely resembles the structure we see today, though it has undergone numerous renovations and repairs over the centuries. The changes made by Abd al-Malik were seen as an attempt to restore the Kaaba to its appearance during the Prophet Muhammad's time, aligning it with tradition and consolidating Umayyad authority. The incident highlights how the Kaaba has been both a religious and political symbol throughout Islamic history, with its structure reflecting the prevailing political dynamics of the time. Thank you for joining us on this journey through history of the role of Kaaba in the political struggles of Muslim empires through ages. The siege of Mecca and the events surrounding Abdullah ibn Zubayr's rebellion were not just a tale of political ambition, but a stark reminder of the lengths to which leaders would go to secure power. But this was not the end of the Kaaba's trials. As centuries passed, new challenges arose, this time under the reign of the Abbasid dynasty, who were challenged by the enigmatic Karamtians in the early 10th century. In the next part of our series, we'll explore the dramatic and unfortunate story of the attack on Hajj pilgrimage and the Kaaba by the most extremist and militant sects ever, the Karamtians. The Karamtians dared to challenge the sanctity of the Kaaba. They attacked the Hajj gathering, killing thousands of Hajj pilgrims, desecrating the Kaaba and carrying the black stone, the Hijr-e-Aswad, with them, holding it for over 2 decades, sending shockwaves through the Muslim world. Who were the Karamtians, and what motivated them to carry out these shocking and unacceptable attacks? How did these sacrilegious acts serve their political and religious objectives? Stay tuned for part 3 of this series. If you like this video, please like and share it. Also make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. May peace and blessings be with you.